All right, man, peace. So, brothers, this is going to be my review of Michael Jordan's sports docuseries, The Last Dance, episodes 7 and 8. And of course, what episodes 7 and 8 document are Michael Jordan's baseball career, his short-lived baseball career, based on the shaming ritual of his quote-unquote gambling, as well as his father's ritualistic removal. He had to go through a certain period of humbling and preparation for his return to the NBA, so that he could regain his acclaim and his superstardom. What many people don't understand are the level of teams that he played against in the playoffs and in the finals for that second three-peat. The Orlando Magic were led by Penny Hardaway and Shaquille O'Neal. They won 60 games in the 95-96 season. The Seattle Supersonics won 64 games in the regular season in the Western Conference. The next year, the Bulls faced the Miami Heat in the 97 Eastern Conference Finals. They had won 61 games. Then they faced the Utah Jazz, who'd won 64 games. Then in 1998, they faced the Indiana Pacers, who I believe won 58 games. And then the Utah Jazz, who won 62 games. So all of those teams were championship caliber teams. Many times people forget that because of the greatness of Jordan and those Bulls, and they take credit away from his opponents. It's become more and more popular to try to lavish LeBron James with all this praise for losing to great teams. Many of the championship teams of today, like those Golden State Warrior teams, if being forced to play under 90s rules, would have lost to many of those 90s teams. The Orlando Magic with Shaquille O'Neal, Penny Hardaway, Nick Anderson, Dennis Scott, Horace Grant, they would be called a super team today. The Seattle Supersonics with Gary Payton, Shawn Kemp, Detlef Schrempf, Sam Perkins, Hersey Hawkins, they might be called a super team today. A lot of people don't know who Hersey Hawkins was. He was a player who averaged over 20 points per game at shooting guard multiple times in the late 80s going into the early 90s. Sam Perkins was a great stretch four who actually played with Jordan at North Carolina. Detlef Schrempf was a great utility player who could do everything well. So that team was stacked. They were loaded, and it had been a long time in coming for the Supersonics because they had been challenging for Western Conference supremacy since 1993. They were unable to defeat the Phoenix Suns in the 93 Western Conference Finals. In 94, they got shocked in the first round. In 95, they got shocked again in the first round. And in 1996, they finally broke through and got to the finals with Gary Payton, the Defensive Player of the Year, who also would customarily average over 20 points and 8 assists per game. Shawn Kemp, a phenomenal explosive player. So that's who the Bulls had to go up against in 1996 as Jordan made his comeback. So of course, they're going to talk about it. I'm going to chime in.
Shannon, in your opinion, was Michael Jordan a bully or a leader?
Well, it depends on what you're receptive to. Michael Jordan was a proponent of quote-unquote tough love and toughening up the soldiers. As I've stated in other videos, he reminded me of Lou Gossett Jr.'s character in An Officer and a Gentleman, where you don't truly realize what he was doing and why he was doing it until it's all over. That's pretty much what Will Perdue's sentiment was when he reflected back. He was like, yeah, he was an asshole and this and that. But when I think back about it, he was a great teammate because Jordan understood that these guys were average players at best, and he had to compensate for their lack of athleticism and skill by making them as tough as nails.
You know what? I wrote down some things last night, Skip, and I think it's twofold. I think two things can be true, and you've heard me say that so many times. Skip, I believe Mike was a leader, obviously being the best player on the team. That normally gives you that. But I think people look at him and saw how hard he worked. Basketball was the most important thing to him. It was the only thing that really mattered to him. But he was also a bully.
I wouldn't say that basketball was the only thing that mattered to Michael Jordan. I would say that he was serious and passionate about his job. And I think that we live in a world today where most people are not truly passionate about what they do. They just try to act like they are. Even when it's activism, people just want to be seen. Jordan was a person who authentically was passionate about what he did and was doing what he loved. And it's very difficult for most people to understand someone who actually is doing what they feel like they were born to do.
Skip, when I look back at it, I don't believe Michael Jordan fought Steve Kerr or some of these other guys that he got into it with to make sure or to see if they can make shots in the fourth quarter. I believe he did what he did to see if they were tough enough, he could count on them to be around in the fourth quarter.
Exactly. Basically, he said that, Shannon Sharpe. He needed to make sure that those guys would be mentally tough and aware of how tough their environment was going to be when things weren't going well. Not when they were going well, because that's when you need toughness. Toughness is for when things are not going your way. It doesn't matter how tough you are when everything's going your way. Anybody can deal with that.
Because, Skip, for the most part, he was going to have the ball in his hand, and he was going to do what was necessary in order for them to move to win the ball game. He was kind of controlling the chess pieces on the board. So he wanted to make sure, you know what? I believe, and like Steve Kerr said, and it changed. Skip, he did a lot of things to see how much respect he could garner. And I'm not so sure to this day he has a whole lot of respect for Scotty Burrell. Now, he'll say, oh, Scotty's a great guy. But you hear him say it in the documentary, Skip, he gained a newfound level of respect for Steve Kerr. Not that Steve Kerr beat him or anything, but he was the smallest man on the court, and he stood up for himself.
That's the point. And Michael Jordan stated that he was constantly trying to get Scott Burrell to fight him back. And I don't think that it's much of a coincidence that not soon after that team disbanded in 1998, Scott Burrell was out of the NBA because he was not a tough-minded person. He was a nice guy. And it's okay to be a nice guy, but you cannot be a nice guy in a league where you basically have the most competitive athletes in the world, that being NBA basketball players. So the things that Jordan saw, other people saw. The difference is that Jordan actually cared enough to try to bring the best out of Scotty Burrell. You go to these other teams and they see that you're not competitive. They just sit you at the end of the bench and eventually cut you.
Mike says, I can count on him now. Will Purdue, I can count on him now. He did a lot of things to see, Skip, whether or not he was going to be able to trust these guys in the fourth quarter. Not necessarily if they were going to be able to make a shot, but can I trust you? John did a lot of the same things, Skip, but he wasn't a yeller. He wasn't a cursor, and he definitely wasn't getting into a physical confrontation. But basketball stars and football stars, Skip, you and I both know entirely different. The best quarterback, Pat Mahomes, is not going to challenge anybody to a fist fight. Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Elway, Marino, they were not going to challenge guys to a fist fight. But Jordan could. But for me, Skip, for us to sit here and say that's the only style, and you see, Skip, at the end, this was the most emotional that we saw, Mike, because Mike has been reading the articles. And a lot of the articles, 60, 70% of them, said Michael Jordan was a bully. And Mike...
Shannon Sharpe, are you aware that that interview was filmed 3 or 4 years ago? Are you trying to imply that Michael was emotional because the articles are calling him a bully in 2020 when the interview in which he got emotional was filmed 3 or 4 years ago? Come on, brother.
Mike has been reading that, and he said something very interesting, Skip. He said, you might want to say I was a tyrant. Okay, fine, that's whatever. But these guys, they won, and it got us to what we wanted to be. But if you don't like that style, don't use that style. He's saying, look, this is the way I did it. Not saying it's right or wrong, but we won. Skip, we got to be very, very careful doing this, because a lot of times when we have success doing things a certain way, we automatically assume that's the only way, and then we justify, the ends justify the means. But we won. You got to be careful, because if we're in the workplace and I work with a team and our job is sales, and my boss and the strongest guy in the group, and all he does is berate me, but my sales are up, he can say, but look at you, you're top in sales. You would have never done that without it. Nah, bro. Nah. So just be careful with that, Skip. The end doesn't necessarily justify the means, but...
I'm not quite sure I agree with that. It depends on the environment, the situation, the scenario, and what's needed. The ends do justify the means, Shannon Sharpe, unfortunately. It would be great if everybody could hold hands and love each other and win championships, but that's normally not how it goes, especially in basketball, because Michael Jordan knows that nobody's going to care that Scott Burrell got knocked out of the playoffs in 1998 in the second round. But they will care when they talk about him. So he has to make sure that everyone is on the same wavelength mentally and spiritually from a sporting perspective. They're not going to be on the same wavelength physically because they're all given different bodies and different physical gifts. But spiritually, they have to see the game the same way.
They did win. It'll be very interesting. There's a lot of guys that say, it worked, and I respect Mike. But I believe there are a lot of other guys that it didn't work on, and I'm not so sure they have the same level of respect for Mike as some of the other guys. But in this situation, it did work. When it started working in 91, was he not that type of leader in 84, 85, 86 through 90? What transpired, Skip? What happened? Why wasn't they...
The reason why it wasn't working from 84 through 86 and 87 is because the team was filled with cokeheads. From 1987 to 1990, the team was growing and maturing and getting to understand a new system under Phil Jackson, Shannon Sharpe. Why do you keep bringing up 1984 to 1990 when LeBron James never won shit from 03 to 2011? Please stop it, Shannon.
Why didn't they win like 14 titles?
Is it my turn?
I mean, shit. Since John Elway was such a great leader and he wasn't a bully like Michael Jordan, how come he never won shit until Terrell Davis in 1997? That motherfucker was in the NFL for 14 years before he won something.
It's your turn,
Okay.
yeah.
Here I go. It obviously took him a while to take over the team. He went through Doug Collins as a coach and then eased into the Phil Jackson regime. I still say that Doug Collins could have won just as many championships as Phil.
Lies. Doug Collins was not a championship coach. They are championship coaches, and they are just good coaches. They are coaches that you bring in for reclamation projects. A Doug Collins, a Jeff or Stan Van Gundy, a Rick Adelman, a George Karl. These are coaches that can bring your team from the bottom to fair to Midland, maybe even into the playoffs or threatening to get to the second round, maybe even the third round once they mature. But then you have championship level coaches. And Doug Collins was not that guy.
Jackson, because once Michael grew up and took over, he took over the head coaching duties also. Michael Jordan, as you saw last night, was simply the greatest leader / motivator ever there was. There's never been anything like that force of nature you saw last night. And Shannon, I warned you going into this. I was there in 1998. I was the columnist for the Chicago Tribune. I saw it from the inside out. I saw much of this in action, and I told you and warned you going in, it wasn't the prettiest. It could be heartless. He could be ruthless. He could be cold-blooded. He could be all those things that would add up to being a bully, except that there was always method to the madness. And when I say madness, I'm talking about angry, driven, rage-filled madness to win basketball championships. No one has ever wanted to win at any cost the way this guy did. So it wasn't just being a bully for bully's sake. It wasn't just bullying because you're a bad guy and you can get away with it.
Yeah, I think that there was a clear difference between, some of the good-natured ribbing that Jordan would do to Scott Burrell as opposed to some of the tantrums that he would throw, which, quite frankly, none of which appeared on screen over the course of the documentary. I think that it would have been an even better documentary had they showed him going ham on the team or in other situations, because he was known to go ham. Jordan was known to break lockers and call dudes out, tell them they're playing like pussies. If you don't want to play, don't come out the locker room, things like that. Like, he would go off.
He always had a plan of attack on every one of his teammates.
As a matter of fact, Alaa Abdel Nabi, for those of you who don't know, he was an Egyptian player who actually played in the NBA. He came out of Duke. He was on the Portland Trail Blazers in the early 90s. He played in, I think it was a charity basketball game. And he was on Jordan's team. I think that he said it was 1990. It may have been the year that he was drafted. He said that he was playing on Jordan's team and they were playing against a team that had Kendall Gill. Now, Kendall Gill was one of the early players who they called the next Jordan. He came out of Illinois. He grew up in Chicago. He grew up idolizing Michael Jordan. So in this charity game, Kendall Gill was going off in the first half. He had something like 25 points. And Michael Jordan comes into the locker room at halftime and tells his team, if you motherfuckers don't want to win, don't follow me out of the fucking locker room after this halftime is over. Ala Abdul Nabi says Michael Jordan's going off on them, punching the blackboard and everything. And it's a damn charity basketball game involving Michael Jordan against some college kids. Like, he was just going off.
And he treated each teammate very differently. He did not try to bully Scottie Pippen because he knew right away Scottie's abilities were on par with Michael's. They weren't in Michael's league, but they were at least the second best set of skills on the team. But when he saw other players, such as we talked last week about Horace Grant, he saw a weakness in Horace, in which Horace wasn't as...
Horace Grant was a mentally weak player who brought a lot to the team, especially when it came to offensive rebounding and defending the rim. But he was mentally weak. He would disappear in big spots all the time.
Fiery and focused on a nightly basis as he needed to be, and he was going to attack the weakness and try to make it a strength for the playoffs. He attacked the weakness of Scott Burrell, and I saw it day after day. He was relentlessly ruthless to the point of being cold-blooded, cold-hearted on Scott Burrell.
Bullying.
And Scott Burrell took it. He took it and took it. And Michael went so far last night in the doc to say, I tried to get him to fight me in a good way, as in practice fight me, as in, okay, let's do it right here, right now. And Scott Burrell wasn't made of that.
I don't understand why Shannon Sharpe is making these faces and acting incredulous to the concept of practice fights and toughening up players. He's an NFL player. He knows damn well in every training camp there were probably 10 fights a day.
That kind of stuff. But he toughened him up enough that there was one key game in that 98 playoff run, and it was Game 3 at New Jersey. I was there at courtside that night, and that place was going berserk. They had played, New Jersey had the Bulls close twice in Chicago, and it was a hellacious barn burner of a game, that Game 3 at New Jersey.
Yeah, that was a great game. That was one of Jordan's most proficient games that I can remember, at least in that second three-peat era.
Jersey. Michael went crazy and scored 38, but guess who scored 23 points in 24 minutes in that game? Scott Burrell. He could shoot it. And in a big playoff setting on the road, man, he looked pretty strong to me. He looked mentally tough to me because Michael had helped toughen him up. And I also told you on Friday that a leader like Michael could never show any weakness, even in practice, to his teammates. So in that one fateful practice where Steve Kerr admits he can snap, that he's got the kind of personality where he's patient, but when he snaps, he just goes over the edge. And he admitted that day in practice he snapped. And
Yeah, Steve Kerr is one of those guys. He's one of those guys that has a very calm exterior, but if you push him, he's ready to go all the way with it. I know a lot of people like that. The people with the longest fuses normally have the biggest bombs at the end of that fuse.
Punched Michael in the chest, and Michael had been complaining about his tactics to Phil, who had the whistle in his mouth and could call the fouls. And when Phil kept letting Steve Kerr get away with this and that and this and that, and he had been warned by Michael just popped him right in the eye. But to Michael's credit, he said he got in his car after he showered, and he started thinking, you know, I just beat up the littlest guy on the floor. I can't do that. So he called back to the Berto Center and got Steve Kerr's number, called him, talked it through with him, and Steve Kerr and the doc said, in a weird way, it was the greatest thing that ever happened because I stood up to Michael Jordan. And I won his respect, and Michael said in the documentary, he won my respect. So now Michael could trust Steve Kerr to be able to take and make huge shots in huge NBA Finals games because they were on the same wavelength, because there was mutual respect that Michael had forged in practice steel with exchanging punches. Yep, he exchanged punches with Will Perdue. Vanderbilt University's Will Perdue is 7 feet tall, and
Michael was very fond of saying that Will's name should be Will Vanderbilt, not Will Perdue, because because Will wasn't good enough to be named after a Big Ten school.
Perdue was strong, and he said, let's not get this wrong. He was an a-hole. He could be a jerk. He crossed the line numerous times, said Will Perdue in the documentary. But in the end, he was a hell of a teammate, because Will Perdue said when you stand back from it and you let the smoke clear, you realize that he had a purpose to all this.
Of course he did, and quite frankly, all of his Bulls former teammates owe their post-playing careers to Jordan. There's a reason why Will Perdue was able to become an executive for an NBA franchise. There's a reason why Scottie Pippen is still a broadcaster with ESPN. There's a reason why Horace Grant is associated with NBA Cares. There's a reason why Stacey King is a broadcaster for the Chicago Bulls. Why John Paxson became the general manager for the Chicago Bulls. Why B.J. Armstrong was an assistant general manager and now a relatively famous and well-respected agent who at one time represented Draymond Green. There's a reason why Bill Cartwright at one time became the head coach of the Chicago Bulls. There's a reason why even Craig Hodges, who hates Michael Jordan, has been able to write a book and sell copies because of his association with Michael Jordan. Michael built his teammates up to the level where they were able to garner notoriety for themselves and be able to justify it. All because of their association with him.
And you realize that they went 6-0 in the finals and he won 6 MVPs. He never asked any of those guys to do anything he wasn't doing. And I love the one...
Beyond that, he never asked any of those guys to do things that he was doing. He just asked them to show up and do your job. I'll take care of the rest.
Big money quote last night, Shannon, was that he said, my mentality was to go out and win at any cost. And if you don't want to live with that regimented mentality, then you don't need to be alongside me. He's basically saying it's my way or the highway. And he wanted you to get to the same level that he was. And if you don't get to the same level, he said, it's going to be hell for you. And it was hell for a lot of those guys, especially Scott Burrell. And the upside of it was, the upshot was, as Bill Wennington said, you know what? It worked. It did. It was incredibly effective.
Bill Wennington was a huge fan of Michael Jordan's, though. They'd known each other probably since high school. Bill Wennington was one of the prominent players on the St. John's Redmen during the 1980s with Chris Mullin. So Bill Wennington was always a big fan of Jordan's. But he was also a cast-off. People don't understand. That second three-peat team had very few talented players on the squad. It was mostly cast-offs. And Jordan took those guys and was able to win championships. People are going to say, what are you talking about? They had Scottie Pippen and Dennis Rodman and Kukoc. Tony Kukoc was a nice, serviceable player. Now, had he been playing today, had Kukoc been playing today, he may have been a superstar. Because you can't touch the players. He's 6'11", can pass and shoot. But in that era where you could bump the players off their spot, he was just a very good bench player who brought a lot to the table in his minutes because of what he could do, his skill set. But you couldn't leave him out there for 40 minutes and expect him to be a great player because he wasn't. But if you gave him 25 minutes to spell Scotty or play alongside Michael, he could be very potent because he was clutch also.
Effective to me in a very powerful way that I don't see Tom Brady lead that way. I never saw Magic lead that way. I definitely don't see LeBron lead that way. This was Michael's way. There's only one Michael Jeffrey Jordan, and he motivated by fear. And I love the Judd Buechler quote about fear. He said that the fear was palpable, that you could feel it on our practice floor, and you could feel it when he stepped on the floor from opponents. They feared Michael Jordan. He instilled it. He created it. He lived off motivating by fear and winning by fear because he was the baddest man who ever walked on.
Right, that was the Mamba mentality before it had a name. Once again, all of the stuff that you hear Kobe Bryant spew, his fake highfalutin philosophy, is just stuff that he got from Jordan. It's just that Michael Jordan never cared to give it a name because he wasn't pretentious like Kobe Bryant was.
Onto a basketball court.
See, Skip, there's the thing. Magic won. But see, for you think this is the only way and the ends justify the means. I got a couple.
No, I don't think that Skip ever said that. He's just saying that that's how Michael Jordan led.
The issues with points that you made. You said it took him a while to take over the team. After that very first practice, it was said in the documentary, Michael Jordan was the leader of that basketball team. So this notion that it took him till 1991 and he got there in 94, it took him all that time to take over, Skip Bayless. You know that was not the case.
Really what Skip means is that there was still the leftover dribble from the early 80s Bulls teams. They were filled with cokeheads and crackheads. Everybody knows that, Shannon Sharpe. I don't know why you keep bringing up this nonsense about how come Jordan didn't win his first 6 years. Because it was a process that they had to change the entire culture of the team because they had a losing mentality. Go ask John Elway why it took him 13 years to win a championship.
The moment he set foot in Chicago and they scrimmaged, Michael Jordan was the new de facto leader of that ball club. He said he wanted to try to get Scotty Burrell to fight him in a good way. What is there a good way to fight, Skip? That's me. Picking a fight with a guy on the basketball team to say, football team to say, you know what? I'm trying to toughen him up. Skip, for real? And he said something.
So, Shannon, you're saying that never happens. It never happens on a football team that two guys get into a fight because one is trying to test the manhood of the other to see if they're going to be ready for real combat. That never happens, Shannon Sharpe, in football or on the field. Come on, bro. You're so desperate to try to sully the name of Jordan to elevate LeBron's name. It's really pathetic.
Well, I'm trying to get you on my level. Well, that might explain why he can't pick players. Because he's thinking he's getting the guys on their level and nobody's ever going to get to his level.
Well, the conversation is not about Jordan as an executive. Michael Jordan has never been a good executive. He never will be a good executive. Because he's looking at everything from an eagle's eye view. He's unable to understand things from an ant's eye view. Because he's an eagle.
So we got to stop this notion, Skip. See, what's happening with you is that we have a saying in our community, Skip, says, be careful of falling in love with someone's gift. Someone that can act, someone that can dance, someone that can sing, can play basketball. We look at that and they do that so well. We're all willing to overlook all the other flaws. Skip, he's a very flawed. This is bullying.
So name some of LeBron James's flaws. Since you love to digress into LeBron James all the time, let's talk about some of his flaws, Shannon Sharpe. Maybe his unwillingness to stick with the players that are currently on his team and build them up as opposed to trading them away. Michael Jordan didn't have that option. He had to deal with what he had. If LeBron James opened up his locker room and saw the team that Michael Jordan had in 1998, he'd try to trade half those guys. He'd be like, why the hell do we have Steve Kerr, Judd Buechler, and Luke Longley on our team? Those guys are big and slow. Or in Steve Kerr's case, small and slow. Let's get rid of them. What the hell are we going to do with Dickie Simpkins? We got to trade that guy. Randy Brown, what does he do?
But you said because they won 6, it's okay. No, it's not. That's my only thing. Skip, a lot of play was said last week, Skip. I said when he did that to Horace Grant, I said, Skip, I'd have had to fight Mike. Skip, I would not have.
And Mike would have fought you. And whoever the better man was would have been what it was.
Fought Mike because I think he's a bad person. I would not have fought Mike because I think his leadership style. I would have fought him to gain his respect. And if you notice, he had respect for people that stood up to him. And if you didn't, he was going to keep going and going and going. He's the type of guy, like you said, you give him an inch, he's going a mile. Well, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop it. You took that inch, as far as it goes, okay, and then we're going to be done with it. That's all I'm saying, Skip. Be careful. You do this a lot. With Tom Brady, you will find no fault. But when come LeBron, woo!
Here we go. Everything goes back to LeBron. 6 degrees of LeBron.
Be careful with falling in love with someone's gifts. Mike was a bully. They won. His leadership style is not for everybody. It would be very interesting to see if this style could work in today's game.
I doubt if it could work in today's game. I think that Kobe Bryant is the last of that old guard of players who would try to dominate his teammates mentally to build them up.
It would be very interesting to see that. For me, I just believe that these guys rose to the occasion because they wanted to win too. They knew they were a part of.
Well, sir, if that's the case, since you love to ask the question about why Michael Jordan didn't win anything his first 6 or 7 years, how come all of those role players who you claim were so independently competitive, whether they're with or without Michael Jordan, never won a fucking thing until they played alongside Michael Jordan and barely were hanging on in the NBA? Like Steve Kerr was on his way out of the NBA before he landed on the Bulls, and that triangle offense put a little bit of juice into his career, and then playing alongside Jordan made him a household name. Judd Boosler was on his way out of the NBA. Luke Longley was viewed as a flop. He was a lottery pick in 1991 with the Minnesota Timberwolves, I believe, and then got traded to the Bulls or signed with the Bulls in 1993, and he's a household name now. If all of these guys were so competitive and wanted to win so badly, even without Jordan, how come they were on their way out of the NBA until they fell into Jordan's lap? Explain that, please, sir.
Something special. They were never going to get, I don't care how much he wrote them, Will Perdue and Paxson and Kerr and B.J. Armstrong was never going to get on Mike's level. But they were going to be willing to put the work in off season.
Well, Shannon, clearly he wasn't talking about his athleticism or his basketball skill set. He was talking about his win at all costs approach, his never say die approach.
The conditioning to make sure that come fourth quarter, if Mike ever needed them, they were going to be in position to make plays. But we got to stop this notion. Because Mike was 6-0, 6 for 6, 6 MVPs, 6 wins, that this is the right way. And the ends justify the means. Skip, I am not a believer in that notion. I believe that there are other ways that you can lead. And I understand that you can't lead everybody the same way. But this notion that him bullying, and that's what this was bullying, but this was his leadership style. Oh, it's good, and now we 6 for no. I will never ever agree with that because someone got bullied. And Skip, you understand how bullying works. It's someone that the 8th guy on the roster can't be the bully. It has to be someone in a leadership position, and that's what Mike was. And so for me, I have no qualms with the player. I have some issues with how he chose to go about and motivate the other players. You'll never hear me say anything about his game. Yeah, do I think LeBron's better? Yes, that's just me personally, Skip. Oh.
Bullshit. You don't really think that, dude. You're just trying to build your brand off LeBron's name.
Okay, fine. But I got no problem with the man's game. I got no problem with Michael Jordan. I have a problem with some of his leadership skill. And remember, Skip, Phil Jackson said in the piece, I had to tell Mike, camaraderie is a part of being a leader also.
Because that was a part of Phil Jackson's job, to inform Jordan, to rein it in a little bit. That was a part of Phil Jackson's role as basically the psychotherapist of the team. Do we want to get into some of the things that coaches have had to tell LeBron James when it came to his leadership or lack thereof over the course of his career, Shannon Sharpe? Are you sure that you want to go there? Let's ask Mike Brown or David Blatt about their LeBron James experiences. Let's ask Tyronn Lue about the heart procedure that he needed to get due to working alongside LeBron James, or the heart problems, I should say, that he had.
Oh, you just can't whip without some type of reward. And the reward just can't come at the end of the season in titles. He did say that, right, Skip? You heard that, right?
You know, I'm glad you brought up Phil Jackson because the more I watch, the more I think about what I saw from the inside out, the less I think of Phil Jackson's contribution to this. This was all Michael Jordan.
No, sir. Phil Jackson was integral, believe me. He was integral. He was the offset to Michael Jordan. He was the balancing force. He was the offset to Jordan's unbelievable competitive fire. He was the offset to Scottie Pippen's immaturity and inability to control his emotions a lot of times. He was the offset to Dennis Rodman and his psychological breakdowns. He was the necessary offset to all of those things.
Phil Jackson should drop to his knees every night and thank whatever God he worships up in Montana for Michael Jeffrey Jordan. He made...
Seems like Skip Bayless knows some things about Phil Jackson's beliefs.
Phil Jackson, and then Phil was able to segue right into Shaq and Kobe, who had a whole lot of Michael in him. Also,
yes, Phil Jackson was able to segue into Shaq and Kobe, which is something that I believe he knew about from 1998. It's very obvious that Phil Jackson knew he was going to get the LA Lakers coaching job in 1999. And I believe that Skip Bayless even comes to that determination later on over the course of evaluating the Last Dance documentary.
Also driven, also got on teammates, also ridiculed teammates, also hard to live with. And Phil got to quote-unquote coach Jordan and Kobe / Shaquille O'Neal, simply the most powerful offensive force we've ever seen in the history of basketball. So that's what Phil got to do. And in the end, I look at, what is your definition of bully? To me, a bully is a bad guy with a dark heart, with a bad heart. A bad guy who picks on people out of insecurity. He picks on people who are weaker to make him feel stronger because he's not.
I think that Jordan had a little bit of bully in him, but I liken him more to a drill sergeant once again. I think he's more of a drill sergeant.
Sure about his own strength. Michael was supremely sure of his own strength, and he quote-unquote bullied, or as Steve Kerr called it last night, he bludgeoned you to make you stronger to be able to go with him in the postseason. Again, method to it. There was M.O. to it, modus operandi. He always had a plan, and he did not bully Dennis Rodman. He did not bully Scottie Pippen. But we saw what happened once Michael went to baseball, what happened to Scottie Pippen. I told you from the start, Pippen did not have anywhere near the killer will intangibles that Michael was able to bestow on him, to help teach him. And we saw Scottie Pippen in that flashpoint.
Well, Scottie Pippen's role was to play the glue guy. That was Scottie's job. No, Scottie did not have the intangibles of Michael. Scottie, if I was to liken him to anything or anyone, it would be a great character actor in Hollywood, like a Joe Pesci or Steve Buscemi. He's not meant to star in any roles. He's not the leading man. Michael Jordan, he's the Denzel Washington. He's the Harrison Ford. He's the Robert De Niro. He's the one who can carry the picture. The job of a Scottie Pippen is to be a great performer, a great actor, and he'll get the Oscar as well for both Best Picture and Supporting Actor, but the Lead Actor award is going to go to Michael. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Moment, Game 3, they were in danger of getting swept by the New York Knicks. And what did he do? Phil calls a last-second play for Tony Kukoc because he had made 6 last-second shots, walk-off shots already that season without Michael Jordan.
Well, I can say this. If you're going to say that the Bulls were in danger of getting swept in 1994 when Pippen was the captain of the team and Tony Kukoc is the one who showed up, I can go back to the year before when the Bulls were also down 0-2, and you could say that they were in quote-unquote danger of getting swept, and Michael went 3 for 18 in Game 3, and Scottie Pippen was spectacular. Scottie was spectacular in every game of that series other than Game 4 when Jordan scored 54 points.
And he calls the play for Tony, and Scottie said no, and he flat out, as Steve Kerr said, he quit on us. He went and sat down and told Jim Clemens, I'm not going in. Oh.
Yeah, Steve Kerr did not mince any words. He was like, Scottie quit on us. Everyone basically just lit into Scottie, boy.
Okay, P. Meyer.
And Scotty dumbass gonna sit there and say, I would do it all over again.
You get in, says Phil Jackson. Good for Phil. He inbounds to Kukoc, who then made the last shot and really took Scotty Pippen off a huge hook there, because even though the team was devastated by it after the game.
If Tony Kukoc misses that shot, the Bulls probably get swept, and Pippen probably gets traded in the offseason of 1994. And who knows, maybe Jordan doesn't come back to basketball with the Bulls. He comes back with another team, and they may have to alter the script. Who the hell knows?
Game, and there were many tears cried in that locker room on all parts. They said Bill Cartwright gave a tearful speech about how Scotty quit on the team, and it.
Bill Cartwright was the actual verbal leader of the Bulls. Even the first three-peat team, Bill Cartwright was the player that the other players went to for solace and for support and for understanding. It wasn't Jordan. Jordan was always that hard-edged guy, the drill sergeant.
Cannot happen again. But the point was, that's Scottie Pippen. That's the essence of who he was and who he was not. He was Robin to Batman. And once Batman left, Robin wasn't sure how to handle himself. And in the flashpoint moment, he quit. Well, Michael's not going to quit, obviously, and Michael would not have let Scotty quit in that moment. Of course, the last shot would have been called in that sequence for Michael Jordan.
And that's what Scotty's problem was, Skip. But I'm trying to figure out, why the hell is this in Michael Jordan's documentary? This is Scottie Pippen, so what the hell?
Because it's not a Michael Jordan documentary, you idiot. It's a 1998 Chicago Bulls documentary. You're so desperate to figure out a way to nitpick the documentary and to further this false notion that Michael Jordan is trying to assassinate Scotty's character. You're asking a silly question, showing that you're not paying attention, number one. Number two, that you're paying too much attention to the haters that you're on the phone with off camera, i.e. Horace Grant and Isaiah Thomas. Because a lot of Shannon's arguments you could tell he gets from haters, particularly people like Isaiah Thomas and Horace Grant. Horace Grant himself also asked the question of, why is the situation involving Scotty in the documentary? Well, Horace Grant, you were one of the people that they interviewed, so you should have asked that question when they asked it to you. You should have said, isn't this documentary for Michael? Why would you ask me about Scotty? I'm not going to answer the question. Instead, you were one of the people going in on how Bill Cartwright was crying in the locker room. But once again, this was not a Michael Jordan documentary. This was a documentary about the 97-98 Bulls, and the backdrop was the development of the team from being basically a morbid franchise in the early 1980s to its rise to prominence. Started, of course, through the drafting of Michael Jordan. So in order to follow the rise of the Bulls, you have to start with the drafting of Michael Jordan. That's why Michael Jordan is basically the centerpiece of the documentary, as he should have been. It's not that difficult to grasp.
That got to do with Mike. Mike was not even on the team. I mean, why would you put that? Why would you put this in that? This ain't have nothing to do with The Last Dance. Oh.
Well, actually, it does. Every year has to do with The Last Dance. Look at Shannon's face. Every season has to do with The Last Dance because it's building up to The Last Dance, Shannon Sharpe. You never had a problem with any of the other flashbacks. They were flashing back season by season. They covered 1991, 92, 93, 94, and 95. They had to provide context for why Jordan came back and what the situation was on the team when he came back. Why is that a problem for? Oh, let me guess, because Mike was trying to assassinate Scotty's character, right? You just said after the first two episodes that Michael gave Scotty the greatest compliment that he could give him. So now all of a sudden Michael wants to cut down Scotty? It's not Michael's fault what Scotty did.
Okay, if you want to go back and show clips of 84, 85, 90, the struggle, what the hell does Scottie Pippen not going in the ball game has to do with this? And I don't agree with...
Shannon, did it happen or not, bro? All I want to know is, did it happen?
It showed you.
Go ahead.
It just showed you, Shannon, how much they missed Michael. That killer will leadership. That psycho-driven.
Why are you upset for, Shannon? Are you saying they didn't miss Michael? Is that what you're trying to say, bro?
And leadership, that ruthless, heartless, quote-unquote bullying that you talk about, they missed it that year. They weren't quite the same. They had a good year. Scotty was a very talented player. He made the All-Star team. Horace Grant made the All-Star team. Even BJ made the All-Star team. And they had a very good year. But when they needed Michael Jordan, he was not there. Scotty was in the Michael role, and he's simply not Michael Jordan. Period.
But the problem, Skip, and Scottie Pippen was also All-Star Game MVP. Skip, I believe Scottie should have handled it differently. He should have said, Phil, I'm shooting the last shot. I'm not taking the...
You believe Scottie Pippen should have handled it differently. Wow. Is that a news flash? Who the fuck doesn't believe that? Scottie was terrible in that situation, and that hurt his reputation almost irreparably. The best thing that happened to Scottie is that Michael came back, because it made people forget a lot of that bullshit, that baggage that he was carrying. And that hurt the team trickling over into the next season, because they were a 500 ball club. You know, everyone loves to talk about, oh, without Jordan, they were 55-27. Well, talk about the year after that year when the team realized that Scottie wasn't a leader. Talk about that shit.
The ball. Don't go in, because Skip, LeBron was in a very similar situation. You remember David Black called a play. LeBron was supposed to take the ball out and pass it to Kyrie. LeBron said, bull jive. Give me the ball. I'm taking the last shot. Scottie says, hold on. If I'm number 2 all these years, number 1 steps away, I get thrust, and I've done a great job. Remember, Skip, the year Michael retired, there was 57-25. The year he retired, they're 55.
That's another silly argument that the Jordan haters love to use, that they were 57-25, and then the next year they only won 2 fewer games. Once again, I've explained this. The reason why the Bulls only won 57 games in the 92-93 season is because they coasted through that season. The next year without Jordan, they tried to win every game like it was a playoff game, and they still won 2 fewer games.
5-27. So they only lost 2 fewer games. Scottie said, hold on, Phil, wait a minute. If I'm the best player, I get that you come, Skip. You know how it is. Somebody could have hit like 15 shots. Michael Jordan's going to want to take the last shot, because, Skip, you remember the final. They were leaving the first final. They were leaving Paxson wide open. And Jordan still wanted to take the shot, because, Skip, that's how he's wired.
Anyone who watched the Chicago Bulls play during the second three-peat era knows that customarily Phil Jackson would design game-winning shots for Tony Kukoc, even with Jordan on the team. And I believe that was meant to be a lesson to Scottie Pippen. There were many games where the Bulls were down by 1 or down by 2, and Phil Jackson would design a game-winning or game-tying shot for Kukoc, and Jordan wouldn't say shit. He would just go out there, be the decoy, or set the pick, because Jordan understood, just like Phil Jackson understood, that he was doing it to mock Scottie Pippen.
Well, Scottie says, my job is not to bully anybody or beat anyone down, but I'm going to lead in a different way. And he felt that he had earned the right to take the last shot.
He did lead a different way. He led them to a second-round exit. That's what he did.
I don't agree. You're not going to find anybody that's going to agree with Scottie Pippen, because the worst thing you can do to a team is quit on it. And then your teammates saying that you quit or label you a quitter. He was wrong in this situation, Skip.
They never looked at him the same ever again. I don't care what they say. Steve Kerr could sit there and talk about how Scottie was their favorite teammate. They never looked at him the same again, and they knew they were never going to win a championship with him as their head.
But I believe Phil was wrong. If you're going to go down 0-3, go down 0-3 with Scottie Pippen taking that shot.
Bullshit. That's why you can never be the head coach of a championship team, Shannon Sharpe. How the fuck could you say Phil Jackson was wrong and the play that he designed worked? Give me a list of all the game-winning jump shots that Scottie Pippen hit in his career. I'll wait. I'm not even sure if it was more than one. I know that he hit one. I think it was in Sacramento in like 89 or some shit, or 90. That dude was not a last-second jump shot taker. That was not his forte. As a matter of fact, Pippen was known for coming up small in the clutch.
He earned that right.
He didn't earn shit. Give me a break. How the hell he gonna earn something? You'd have to once again show me all the game-winning shots that he's hit Tony Kukoc had hit 3 game winners in that regular season. They showed you that in the documentary. But anyway, that's basically it on that. That's my coverage of episodes 7 and 8 of Michael Jordan's classic sports docuseries, The Last Dance. So peace.